It's odd, really. 12, 15 years ago, my wife and I moved to Selma, and this relatively short time of my life that made a big impact, there are details that are fading. For whatever reason, Miss Bland is not fading. She sticks out as clearly to me today when I saw her up here as if I had, ran into her having dinner at the St. James Hotel last week. And so I've thought a lot when they asked me to do this introduction about what I wanted to say. And the idea that I kept coming back to, and the thing that I have loosely written down here, is the idea of Joanne as the protector of the flame. And I think primarily that's because that's the role she was in when I knew her. She, in addition to that, she was also like an Olympic runner, she passed that torch on. Very fierce advocate for the children. Very much about teaching the children the lessons that she and others learned firsthand. And so making sure that what happened in 1965 and 1964 and even before that wasn't forgotten. Even when for a lot of people it would have been easier, more comfortable to let it fade, to forget a little bit. It finally dawned on me what had been sticking in my craw. Miss Bland is not the protector of the flame. She's not the keeper of the flame. She is the flame. And so that's why her memory burns so brightly with me, because she is the flame. So, ladies and gentlemen, Joanne Bland. I'm so full right now. Choir, the essays, the skits and the dancing. As I get older, I realize that our children are the ones. They are the ones we've been waiting for. Amen. And I know, with this hope I feel now, and with children in Tennessee acting like children I've been touching for years, somebody's doing something right. So I applaud you. Look up. Hurry up, man. Now go away. Old school grandma, you can't be distracting me. And you were wonderful. And all these preachers. By the way, we do have a Tabernacle Baptist Church in Selma. That's where the movement began. We have, not only do we have Mount Olive, we got Mount Olive Baptist Church, Missionary Baptist Church, and we have Mount Olive number 2. Okay? I'm not going to hold you long, because I don't like anybody standing up there talking to me a long time. But let me say this first. Let me give a shout out to my homegirl in the back, Sophia, who was born in Selma, Alabama. Don't play. Hold your head up. Don't be embarrassed, baby. When I was growing up in Selma, I grew up during segregation. That just simply means I'm old.
I didn't laugh.
It's that preacher over there. That wasn't funny. Anyway, it was vastly different than it is today. We still have some issues, don't get me wrong. But growing up, because of the color of my skin, I couldn't do a lot of stuff. And I see some people in here with snow on top that know exactly what I'm talking about. My grandmother, Sylvia Johnson, came to live with us when I was 3 years old. You see, my mom had died in the halls of a hospital in Selma, the White Hospital. My older sister says, if only we were white, they would have had blood for my mom. You see, my mom needed a blood transfusion. And they didn't have what my sister calls any black blood, whatever that is. The blood had to be ordered from Birmingham, which was 90 miles away, and sent to Selma on a bus. And my dad had to pick it up and then rush it over to the hospital. But by the time the blood got to Selma, my mom was gone. And my baby brother in her tummy too.
My grandmother came home from Detroit to the funeral and decided to stay and rear us along with my father. Grandmother had what a lot of people who live above the Mason-Dixon line have. I call it that Mason-Dixon mentality. That because they were in the north, there were no crazy folks up there. But we know now crazy folks are everywhere, period. You know, she had that semblance of freedom. She was part of that great migration to the north to freedom. And they all lived in the ghetto over here. But they could try on clothes. They didn't have those crazy white folks we had in Selma doing crazy things. So it was only when they ventured from that area of love that they experienced that. But everything they needed was right in that place. They didn't have to go anywhere. Grandmother couldn't understand how things had not changed in all the years she had been gone. So she started talking to the women in the community about the freedoms that she enjoyed in Detroit. And they introduced her to a lady named Mrs. Amelia Boynton. Mrs. Boynton and her husband, Sam, were members of Tabernacle Baptist Church. And they formed an organization in the early 1930s called the Dallas County Voters League, of which Selma is the county seat of Dallas County. My grandmother started going to the meetings and she would take us with her. Boring. We had to sit at the feet of those history makers while they strategized on how they was gonna get this thing called freedom. Now I thought they were the dumbest old folks in the nation because I already knew Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but they didn't. They were still trying to get freedom. I sat there smug in my belief that I was the smartest person in this room. But some of you will know what I'm talking about when I say I grew up during a generation of children who were supposed to be seen and not heard. Y'all don't know nothing about that. You grow up thinking you got a place in this whole scheme of things. But one day we were downtown on Selma is about this size, maybe smaller. But downtown consists of about 3 blocks uptown, right? On the same street the bridge is on, Broad Street, our main drag. There's a drugstore there today. It's called Carter's Drugstore. Carter's had a lunch counter at that time, and I wanted to sit at that counter, but my grandmother said I couldn't. She said, colored children, young people, that's what we were called then, colored. Colored children can't sit at the counter. It didn't stop me from wanting to sit at that counter. Every time I pass by, I see those white kids, and I'd wish it was me. Well, one particular day, my grandmother and one of her friends were in front of the store, and I was doing what I always do, peeping that window, wishing it was me. My grandmother noticed, and she leaned over my shoulder, and she pointed through the window to the counter. She said, when we get our freedom, you can do that too. Hey, I became a freedom fighter that day. That was the day I understood instantly that the freedom that Grandma and her old friends were trying to get, that was the good freedom, the one that would let me sit at that counter. I started going down to First Baptist Church with my older sisters to the meetings of SNCC. They tried to teach me the principles of nonviolence. I flunked. Let me explain that. I grew up in the hood. I grew up in George Washington Carver homes, right? And the only principle at that age I could really grasp, and don't all y'all preachers come running up to me afterwards talking about me because I'm still violent, so pray for it. Was the one where they say, hate with love, turn the other cheek. I still have a little problem with that today, so keep your hands to yourself while I'm in Tennessee. God ain't through with me yet. And I'm living in the projects. I come out the door and somebody on this side hit me and I turn my head. I go to a few more steps, somebody else hit me and I turn. Oh no. Oh no, I'd act so ugly in the church my older sisters would put me out. They started nonviolence training. They would lean over and say, you can go outside now. Go ahead, stay in the churchyard now. I get up and go. Gladly. Now, I've come a long, long way since then. Young people, violence in any form is wrong. It shouldn't even be in a civilized society. Okay? See what you can do before your babies get here. I like the marching, though. They come out that church and line up. I'd hop in that line like I've been training all day. We march up to that old courthouse where the board of registrars is. They'd see us coming more often than not. They would lock the doors. Now, most of us were not old enough to register to vote. So we would kneel on the steps of the courthouse and someone would say a prayer to the Creator, asking him to lift the hearts of those evil men so our parents could vote for us until we could vote for ourselves. You know, that got old quickly. They started rolling yellow school buses up in front of the courthouse and loading us up on those buses and taking us to jail. They would put us in cells that were supposed to hold 1 to 2 people. I've never been in a cell that didn't seem like 40 to 60 people were all jammed up in there. If you were lucky enough to get to bed, I bet you didn't sit that long. The mattress was gone. It was just that metal frame there. And then it had that lip right in front to keep the mattress from sliding off. It didn't feel good on your thighs at all. The toilet, right there, no privacy. With that many people all jammed up in a room, you don't want to be nowhere near the toilet, trust me on that one. Our food, dry beans. For those of you who have cooked dry beans, you know you can't just open that pack and put it in the water. You got to pick out the stuff you can't eat. You know, the rocks, the dirt, the insects, the grass. Nobody did that for us. I think they took pride in bringing you a plate with a big old rock sitting up on it. Most of you I know wouldn't have eaten it. By that third day, I promise you, you would have pushed that rock aside and hoped you could not identify what you were crunching on. At least you could have that in your stomach. Those things were done to break our spirits. But we were as low as we could go. They let us out. And I found out I still couldn't sit at that counter. I'd be right back in their faces. Oftentimes going back to jail the same day. By the time I was 11 years old, I had been to jail 13 documented times. And I was not the youngest. If you were there, you went. In December of 1964, a letter was written to a man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., inviting him to Selma to speak at a program on Emancipation Proclamation Day. Dr. King came. He already knew of the work that the League had been doing toward voter registration. He already knew of the work that SNCC had been doing in Selma toward voter registration. You know, Dr. King chose Selma, my hometown, to be the headquarters for the battle for voting rights in this entire United States, for everybody. He sent in his lieutenants, and they were stationed all around us throughout what we call the Black Belt of Alabama. It could be named for the people because that we had a large concentration of blacks there, but it's named for the soil, that fertile soil, and that's why we had a large concentration. He sent Reverend James Orange to Perry County, a small rural county approximately 30 miles west of us. In Perry County, Reverend Orange managed to organize students. It was easier to organize the students. After all, their parents worked for the same people who were trying to keep us from getting the right to vote. They marched on their courthouse and were arrested, all of them. Reverend Orange himself told me that about 3 o'clock that day, a state trooper came into the area where he was housed with a rope. On the end of that rope was tied a noose. Reverend Orange said he threw it over the top of his cell and that noose hung in his face all day long. He had to sit there knowing it may be his last day on earth. That evening, they let the children out, all of them. They kept Reverend Orange. A mass meeting was being held at a church approximately two blocks from the jail. The children ran into the church and disrupted this meeting. They said, "You have to do something. You have to do something now. They are going to kill him." The people in the church decided they would go down to that jail and walk around it all night long in hopes that their mere presence would save this man's life. When they left the church, they were attacked and brutally beaten by law enforcement officers. A young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson emerged from the church just in time to see a state trooper beating his grandfather, his 82-year-old grandfather. Jimmy ran over and he pleaded with this trooper, "Don't beat my grandfather, please. Take him to jail if he's done something wrong." Jimmy's mom saw them beating her dad too, and she ran over. As she approached, that trooper drew back that billy club to hit her. Jimmy put up his hand. The trooper shot him. Jimmy died 8 days later at Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma. It was then that the leaders decided they had had enough. They were going to take his body to Montgomery and put it on the steps of the Capitol and demand the right to vote from our then Governor George Wallace. On March 7, 1965, we gathered on the playground of George Washington Carver Homes, and led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams came down Broad Street and over that Edmund Pettus Bridge and met a wall of policemen. When that line stopped, John Lewis asked permission to pass. The policeman told him there will be no march between Selma and Montgomery. You have 3 minutes to disperse and go back to your church. In 1 minute and 15 seconds, they attacked. I had never experienced violence. Marching was fun to me. I liked the spirit of the movement, the songs, the chants, being with my friends, not going to school. I liked all of that. When I crested that bridge and I could see across, I saw state troopers lined all the way across all 4 of the lanes, right up under the traffic light. I knew we were not going to Montgomery. When I saw that, I saw troopers and the sheriff's posse lined on both service roads on each side. Some on horses, some sitting on cars. So I'm too far back to hear or see what is happening. I don't need to hear or see what is happening. I was a warrior. I knew the procedure. I knew when John Lewis and Hosea got to that line of policemen, one of them would ask permission to pass. It would be denied. They would go down on their knees and we would follow suit. One of them would say a prayer to the Creator, then stand up and we go back to where we started from. You either plan a new strategy or just regroup and come right back. I'm standing there waiting for the front to go down when suddenly I hear gunshots and screams. I think they're killing the people down front. Before we could turn to run, it was too late. They came in from both sides, the front and the back, and they were just beating people. Old, young, black, white, male, female, it didn't matter. They were just beating people. People lay everywhere not moving, bleeding, and you couldn't stop to help them, or you'd be beaten too. The gunshots I heard, nobody was shooting bullets on that bridge that day. They were the tear gas canisters being shot into the crowd. Tear gas burns your eyes. It gets in your lungs. You can't breathe. You can't see. You panic. Oftentimes you run right back to the same people you're running from. You know what I remember the most? The screams. People were screaming and screaming and screaming. It seemed like it lasted an eternity. If you could outrun those men on foot, you couldn't outrun the horses. The horses were afraid. They were running horses right into the crowd. They were rearing and kicking. Bones were being broken. It was horrible. The last thing that I remember on that bridge that day is seeing this horse and this lady. And I don't know what happened. Did the man on the horse hit her and she fell? Did the horse just run over her? I don't know. I do know, as I stand here almost 53 years later, I can still hear the sound her head made when it hit that pavement. The last thing, the next thing I remember, I was on the city side of the bridge. in the back of a car. My head was in my sister Linda's lap, and Linda was crying. When I became fully awake, I realized what was falling on my face were not my sister's tears. It was her blood. My 14-year-old sister had been beaten on that bridge and had wounds in her head that required 28 stitches. Yet on that following Tuesday, March 9th, I held that same sister's hand as we followed Dr. King and Dr. Abernathy to that bridge again. And young people and old people, I'm not ashamed to tell you that when I got to the top of that bridge and I could see across, I didn't want any more freedom. I saw the same scene that I had seen on that Sunday. Whatever the cost of this freedom was just too much for this 11-year-old. I tried to go back. But my sisters held my hand and they kept talking, trying to coax me across. I remember one of them saying, "Come on, they're not gonna beat Dr. King." I went, but I was scared. This time Dr. King asked permission to pass. Policeman told him the same thing, only this time the front went down. Dr. Abernathy said a prayer, and after prayer, he and Dr. King stood up and led us back to Brown Chapel AME Church, my church, where Dr. King held a mass meeting. At that mass meeting, he told us he had applied for a court order that would give us the legal right to walk from Selma to Montgomery if we so wanted to, but more importantly, be protected all of the way. It was signed on March 17th by a judge in Montgomery named Frank Johnson, and on March 21st, we left Brown Chapel one more time, came down Broad Street and over that bridge, and those same policemen who beat us up on that Sunday had to protect us all the way from Selma to Montgomery. 5 days it took. 5 days of walking. Started raining on the second day. Nobody turned around. There are no motels between Selma and Montgomery today. There were none then. People slept on the ground. Everything had to be brought to them. And August 6th of that very same year, the Voting Rights Act was signed, and it removed those obstacles that prevented us from voting. In Dallas County, which Selma is the county seat, we went from 240 out of a possible 15,000 eligible black voters to 9,600 almost immediately. And it still took us 36 years to get rid of the same mayor that was on the bridge on Bloody Sunday. Go figure. It's just not good enough to register. It's not even just good enough to go vote, is it? Who was counting the votes when we got the right to vote? The same people who were trying to keep us from getting the right to vote. And we trusted that they would do right. They didn't. The moment we got totally involved in that election process, it was then and only then that we had any change, period. And now, I dare say, we'll never ever have another white man unless something drastic changes, because every time something like that happens, we have mass white flight. And what white people don't understand is if you go over there, I'm coming too. Ain't nowhere for you to go that I'm not going to eventually get there too. So quit running and learn to get along. I don't know, you're going to run out of country soon, I promise you. When we elected our first African-American mayor, the majority of our white people just moved right up the street and made their own little town like we wasn't going to come over there too. They built a subdivision. We got jobs now and money too, so we went and bought us a new house too. We're gonna have to learn. We're gonna have to learn that the color of my skin does not dictate who I am. The children said it so succinctly. Children get it. That's why I don't waste my time with y'all old folks. I really don't. And it's not much changing I'm going to get with you. And it's going to come to a point, even if you look like me, we're going to have some differences because you might not like the methods I use, and I sure ain't going to like the ones you use because I know mine right. You understand? The children get it. They get it. That's because they are not loaded down with that baggage that you picked up over the years. Now, as good Christian folks, and I know the people I need to be talking to, with the color guard around me with those, with their uniforms and with the gun, and the sheriff standing right there, they're not even in here. We're always preaching to the choir. Does that lady have on my top over there? Anyway, we're going to have to learn to do exactly what those children said. We know what's missing. They just told us, love. They told us. What is it that makes us separate? You like eating, I like eating. I like talking. Most of y'all like talking too. Especially, I met about 140 preachers since I've been in here. Women and men. So I know they... Let me leave these preachers alone. But you know what I'm saying. You know exactly what I'm saying. Now, my grandmother, and I'm going to leave you with this. My grandmother used to say all the time, she see a penny, and we pick it up. To this day, I still pick up pennies, right? She said she would pick up the penny and say, mighty rivers are filled drop by drop. Now, if you add your drop, you add yours, you add yours, you add yours, soon we'll have a mighty river that'll wash all this craziness away once and for all. And then, and only then, will we be free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we'll be free at last.